Howdy folks, it's Leo Alderbold here. Hope you're doing well. Well, I'm taking a break from the grind of my work, which often sees me sitting at a computer most of the day. Despite the fact that my work is woodlands based, I do end up having to sit down for long periods of time on a laptop. Which is fine, you know, but it can be quite bad for the body and the soul. So my back's stiffened up quite a bit. I thought I'd just come out, go for a bit of a walk through the fields by my place. Come find somewhere and read my book for an hour or so. Smoke a pipe, talk to you folks. I'll just show you around quick. So apologies for the jaunty camera angle again. But yeah, I live in a fairly nice place really. Pastoral scene. My house, where I live, is basically behind me. Well, behind me and kind of over in that direction, but there's a couple of workshop buildings over there, and the Lime Bay Winery. So I live right next door pretty much to a place that makes wine and cider. I'm not entirely sure that's a good thing for me, but it's a lovely location. It's beautiful. I mean, this is my place. So it could be significantly worse. I could be living in a city, for example. Although my character wouldn't tolerate it. I couldn't live anywhere built up, not at all. I'm smoking in the pipe that I got from Simon, Ariège pipe smoker, in his giveaway recently. This beautiful chap from St. Claude in France with a horn band. I really love this pipe. It's just fantastic. Absolutely lovely. It's a real pleasure to smoke and hold, and it's very tactile, you know. And it smokes great as well. I was smoking some Germain's Rich Dark Flake. So not a French tobacco, but a Channel Island tobacco, and close enough, I guess, to be a partner to a pipe of that provenance. And I've come out to read my book for a bit, just get away from my laptop screen. So, book that I'm reading at the moment is this one. It's called Meadowland by John Lewis Stemple, The Private Life of an English Field. And what better place to sit and read it than here in an English field? Really beautiful book, really well written. Guy I've not come across before, so you know, he's a new one for me, but it's a very well written, very lovely book. And while I think about it, I'm drinking a beer. Because it's significantly nicer to be drinking a beer out in the field behind my house than inside it. Speckled Hen, the original. Lush. I've been dealing today with the nightmare of red tape and bureaucracy that is the planning authorities. So I'm at the moment I'm trying to basically go through the paperwork to get a client of mine the proper paperwork in place to be able to erect a 3 metre by 3 metre tool shed in his woodland. I won't go into the details, but goodness me, I mean the red tape, the bureaucracy, and the jobs worths that do the job of in local planning authorities. Seriously, they're going to be first against the wall come the revolution, I can assure you. And they seem to be absolutely intent on making life difficult for anybody who's trying to be remotely progressive in any way. Now, my business is in sustainable forestry and sustainable development. And consequently, my clients are people who come to me specifically because they know that what I do is it's not erecting buildings and things like that in places. Generally, I work very much with with nature. But really, even to get something that is absolutely zero to minimal impact done, oh geez, I tell you what, it's a fucking nightmare. Yeah. So planning authorities are not my favourite people. But still. I'll probably get to work again later on this evening, because I tend to be a bit of a night owl when it comes to working. And I do a lot of my work at stupid o'clock in the evening. But in the meantime, I thought I'd come and have a beer or smoke and read my book. Just enjoy the fact that it's June, it's beautiful, we've got a beautiful blue sky. I live in a pretty quiet place. Yeah, and it's nice. Oh, I can feel the stress falling off me already. And I'm surrounded by these oak trees like the one I'm sitting under here. They're sort of remnants, if you were, really. Because our landscape is one which is carved up into fields, a patchwork of fields. And you'll find little copses or warrens and woodland in the hills or on steep banks, in little corners which are unproductive agriculturally or something like that. But a lot of the landscape that I'm sitting in at the moment is grass farming, basically. It's farming for silage, for cattle fodder or sheep fodder. So it's fairly intensively managed. A lot of NPK fertilizer dumped in it to make the grass green. It's what we call improved grassland, which is always always a source of a chuckle for me, because there's nothing improved about it. It's basically taking a couple of species of grass that basically are high yielding, chucking a bunch of fertilizer on it, and then cutting it a couple of times a year for silage. So as a result, you have very little biodiversity, and off you go, little fella. A bug of some kind, not quite sure what he was, but very little biodiversity. Both in terms of the soil and the soil microbiota, so to speak, or the soil biota, and in the vegetation as well. There's nothing. There's no wildflowers or anything here. This is not a hay meadow, not an old traditional meadow or anything like that. So these hedgerows, like I'm sitting next to, these are kind of like the last vestige, if you like, the last bastion of something slightly wild, although in reality not wild at all. Because they were only really put here during the enclosures, which was a piece of history going back to the 18th, 19th centuries, when the land was carved up. Basically, commoners were effectively excluded from it, and the land was carved up into field parcels, which pretty much exclusively had exclusively the use of a wealthy landowner. And these hedgerows here are pretty much a remnant of that. But they're really, really important wildlife corridors. And there's always really interesting stuff to see in them. Where did my tamper go? Ah. Kind of like a micro environment of their own, really, in a way. Kind of like a mini woodland. So these field the hedgerows, they're there to mark field boundaries. Let's just see if I can show you. So all of the biodiversity that you'll find in a typical English field will be here on the margins. It will be here in this hedgerow. And right off the bat, I can see we've got a couple of different species in here. We've got a prunus over there. We've got a malva, sorry. So an apple of some description. I can't see what without getting up. We've got field maple. What else have we got? Blackthorn. Now these standard trees like this oak here, these are really only retained to provide a bit of shade. But also because we do actually have some environmental regulations that, stop people from cutting them down and getting rid of them for no particular reason. But these are great little wildlife corridors. So all of the wildlife that exists, I mean, what looks like a beautiful green, lush, fertile, and diverse landscape is actually a bit of a green desert. And this is what a lot of people really don't understand. For somebody like me, or for anybody really who's got an interest in ecology, forestry, wildlife, biodiversity, nature, it's very difficult to look at this landscape here and think and see anything other than this green desert, because all you're seeing is this monoculture of grassland that is really only there for cattle feed, dairy predominantly around this area at least. And all of the wildlife, what little of it is left, this is their haven. These hedgerows, this is where they actually live. But years ago, and we only have to go back a couple of generations, sort of end of the Second World War. That was when agriculture really started to intensify over here. When all of these fields would have been mown by hand, we had a lot more biodiversity. We had things like corncrakes, which are extinct in mainland England now. They're kind of a few pockets of them left up in the Scottish islands and highlands, but they used to be a really common bird here, and basically because of farming practices we've killed them all off, because now a farmer will go around this in his tractor with a mower and just cut it all, and go around in such a way that anything basically gets pushed into the middle of the field, into the longer grass, and when he comes along into that middle part, that's it, minced up in the machine. Yeah, so these little hedgerows here, these are some of the most biodiverse parts of the countryside in this part of the country. So they're incredibly valuable for biodiversity and all of that sort of stuff. Unfortunately now the practice is to just go along them with a flail on a tractor and cut the sides and the top, keep them this level. But traditionally these were laid by hand, so somebody skilled would have taken a billhook and an axe and a saw, and actually what we call pleaching, or laying the stems of the individual trees that form up these hedges. And they are tree species, they're not bush species. The composition of this species composition of this hedgerow here should be canopy trees. They should be in a woodland, but they're maintained at this level, basically for field separation and for keeping stock in. But somebody would have gone along this hedgerow in years past and laid it. Well, that's where you kind of cut through the stem of the tree most of the way, but not so much that you kill it. You retain a bit of the cambium layer, a bit of the bark, a bit of the living tissue of the tree, so enough so you can bend the stem down, and then the tree will grow upwards again from that. And what you create is this really dense hedge that keeps cattle out or in, and is really good for biodiversity. But that practice, unfortunately, now is pretty much exclusively used in areas of high conservation value, or determined to be high conservation value. And realistically, it's just not cost effective for farmers to do it. So. But I think years ago, when I first started getting into the business that I'm in, these things, hedgerows, was what started me off, I guess, because there's just this world of history in them. And some of these field boundaries, some of these hedgerows, they can go back hundreds and hundreds of years. But regardless of their much degraded state here in the 21st century, for me they're like a little oasis of wildness almost. Deep inside you've got critters running around, and quite often you can tell a lot about the landscape by the plants that are actually growing in the hedgerow itself. So if you find woodland species, for example, in the hedgerow, then you'll know that hedgerow was originally a part of a woodland. And all that's happened is somebody's cleared the woodland, but they've retained an edge of it to act as a cattle boundary, or the demarcation of their property. So you can tell a lot about the history of the landscape by what you see in a hedgerow. Wow, this is almost 20 minutes. And I haven't even begun to talk about what I was actually going to talk about, so I guess I'll save that for another day. But if you're interested in reading more about the British landscape, I can highly recommend a chap by the name of Oliver Rackham. He only died a couple of years ago. And unfortunately he died just before a seminar that I was due to go to and see him. But he was an historian of the British landscape. He's written a number of books which are just a fascinating resource for anything to do with the history of the countryside. And one of them indeed is called The History of the Countryside. So do go and check out Oliver Rackham's books if you're into that kind of thing, as I am. But about 20 minutes, I guess I should probably wrap up this video. I've managed to ramble about hedges instead of instead of what I was going to talk about, which was coming of age ceremonies and the importance of them and the lack of them in our society. But as I say, I shall leave those thoughts for another day then. You folks take care. I'll catch you again soon.